At that moment, nobody knew that Naomi Carter wasn't just a tenant. She owned the entire building. Hi, I'm Naomi Carter, and I'm about to tell you a story that will make you question everything you think you know about successful men and their hidden prejudices. But the most shocking part was yet to come. Let me start from the beginning. 3 years ago, I was a 28-year-old Harvard MBA graduate who had just closed her biggest real estate deal yet, a $50 million downtown Chicago high-rise. I came from nothing. Grew up in the South Side projects with my grandmother after my parents died in a car crash when I was 12. My grandmother, Dorothy Carter, was a force of nature. She worked 3 jobs: cleaning offices downtown during the day, stocking shelves at a grocery store in the evenings, and doing laundry for neighbors on weekends. Every night, she'd come home exhausted, her hands cracked from bleach and cleaning solutions, but she'd still sit with me at our tiny kitchen table and help me with homework. "Naomi, baby," she'd say, her voice hoarse from fatigue. "Education is the only thing they can't take away from you. Promise me you'll use that brilliant mind of yours." But there was something I didn't know yet. For men like Derek Matthews, I was just a target. I kept that promise. Straight A's through high school, full scholarship to Northwestern, then Harvard Business School. By 25, I was working 80-hour weeks at Goldman Sachs, learning everything I could about commercial real estate. By 26, I'd saved enough to make my first investment, a rundown warehouse in Brooklyn that everyone said was a mistake. 2 years later, that mistake sold for 4 times what I paid for it. That's when I knew I had found my calling. By 28, I owned a portfolio worth over $200 million, properties all across Chicago, New York, and LA. But here's the thing about being a young Black woman in commercial real estate. People always assume you're someone's assistant, someone's girlfriend, or that you got where you are through diversity programs. They never assume you earned every single penny through blood, sweat, and 18-hour workdays. They never assume you outworked everyone in the room. They never assume you're simply better at what you do than they are. That mindset is exactly what made me vulnerable to Derek Matthews. I first met Derek at the Chicago Business Leaders Charity Gala in November. It was one of those events where everyone's trying to out-network each other while pretending to care about underprivileged kids. The kind of event where a single table costs more than most people make in a month, and everyone feels good about themselves for giving back. That sparkling Derek's eyes at that moment, I didn't know what it meant yet. I was standing by the bar, checking emails on my phone about a potential acquisition in Manhattan, when this tall, distinguished white man in an expensive suit approached me. His confidence was immediate and commanding, the kind that comes from a lifetime of doors opening automatically. "You look like you'd rather be anywhere else but here," he said, with this charming smile that I'd later learned was weaponized. I looked up. Derek Matthews. I recognized him immediately from Forbes covers, business journals, and CNBC appearances. CEO of Technova Industries, one of the fastest-growing software companies in the Midwest. At 43, he had that silver fox appeal that made him a regular at Chicago's most exclusive events. Handsome in that practiced way that successful men cultivate, probably spent more on his haircut than most people spend on groceries in a month. Wedding ring? Notably absent. "Just making sure my newest acquisition doesn't burn down while I'm drinking overpriced champagne for charity," I replied, not looking up from my phone. His eyebrows shot up. Genuine surprise, which I could tell was rare for someone like him. "Acquisition? What line of work are you in?" "Commercial real estate. Just closed on the Morrison building downtown." I watched his expression change in real time. That look I'd seen 1,000 times. Surprise, then rapid mental calculation, then genuine interest. But there was something else there, something I should have paid attention to. A predatory gleam that I mistook for admiration. "The Morrison building, that's a $50 million property." $52 million, actually. I finally looked up, meeting his eyes directly. Derek leaned against the bar, suddenly very interested. His whole body language shifted from casual approach to focused attention. "I'm Derek Matthews, Technovandistries. And you are?" "Naomi Carter, Carter Properties." I nodded, trying to hide my surprise that he knew my work. Most people in Chicago's business circles had heard whispers about the young woman making waves in commercial real estate, but few connected the name to the face. Impressive. Very impressive. He was studying me now, like I was a particularly interesting specimen. "You know, I don't think I've ever met a woman quite like you." And there it was, the first red flag I should have caught. But what happened next would change everything. The phrase, "quite like you," should have set off alarm bells. But in that moment, surrounded by Chicago's business elite, being recognized for my achievements by someone of Derek's caliber felt validating in a way I hadn't expected. "I've been following your career," he continued, ordering us both drinks without asking what I wanted. "The way you identified those emerging markets before anyone else saw the potential, brilliant. Absolutely brilliant." He handed me a glass of champagne. "Tell me, what's your next move?" For the next hour, we talked business. Derek was incredibly knowledgeable, asking smart questions about market trends, zoning laws, and development strategies. He seemed genuinely interested in my insights, nodding thoughtfully at my analysis of Chicago's commercial real estate landscape. But more than that, he made me feel heard. In a room full of men who usually talked over me or dismissed my opinions, Derek hung on every word. He asked for my thoughts on his company's expansion plans, valued my opinion on potential office locations, and treated me like an equal. "You know," he said as the evening wound down, "I'm hosting a small dinner party next week. Just a few people from the business community. I'd love for you to join us. I think you'd find the conversation stimulating." I should have been more cautious. I should have researched him more thoroughly. I should have trusted my instincts about that predatory gleam. But I was flattered. Here was one of Chicago's most successful CEOs genuinely interested in my work and my opinions. Derek asked for my number that night, and I gave it to him. You haven't seen the biggest surprise yet. Within a week, Derek was calling me daily. Not just brief business calls, but long conversations that stretched into the evening. He'd call just as I was finishing up at the office, and we'd talk for hours about everything. Market trends, investment strategies, books we'd read, places we traveled. "You have such a fascinating perspective," he'd say. "I've never met anyone who thinks about commercial development the way you do." Within 2 weeks, we had our first dinner at Aliana, one of Chicago's most expensive restaurants, the kind of place with a months-long waiting list and a tasting menu that costs more than most people's monthly car payment. "You're incredible," he told me over the 7-course molecular gastronomy experience. "I've dated doctors, lawyers, even a federal judge, but I've never met a woman with your kind of ambition, your drive." He leaned forward, his blue eyes intense and focused entirely on me. "Most women I meet are content to be arm candy or spend their husband's money on shopping and spa days. But you built an empire from nothing. You're like a female version of me." I felt flattered, genuinely flattered.
Here was this successful, attractive man who seemed to truly appreciate my achievements. He wasn't intimidated by my success. He was attracted to it. In the dating scene where men often felt threatened by successful women, Derek seemed to celebrate it.
But Derek's real intentions behind those words were something I wouldn't understand until much later. "Tell me about your childhood," he said, cutting into what looked like a deconstructed version of something that might have once been a vegetable. "How does someone go from where you came from to this?" The way he said "where you came from" should have been my second red flag. There was something in his tone, not quite condescending, but not quite respectful either, like he was studying a particularly interesting case study. But I was caught up in the romance of it all. The expensive restaurant, the attentive service, the way Derek seemed genuinely interested in my story. So I told him about my grandmother, about the projects, about working my way through college and business school. "Remarkable," he said when I finished. "Truly remarkable. You've overcome so much." That word, overcome, like my background was an obstacle to be surmounted rather than a source of strength that has shaped who I became. Over the next month, Derek pulled out all the stops. Private dinners at exclusive restaurants where the waitstaff knew him by name, weekend trips to his house in the Hamptons, a sprawling estate with its own private beach, where we'd walk along the shore and he'd paint pictures of our future together. He even took me to a charity auction in his private jet, a sleek Gulfstream, where we sipped champagne at 30,000 feet while he told me about his plans to expand Technova internationally. "I want to show you off," he'd say, his hand possessive on my back as he introduced me to Chicago's power players. "You're not like other women, Naomi. You're special. You understand the game." The way he said "other women" should have bothered me more than it did, but I was caught up in the whirlwind of it all. The attention, the luxury, the way he seemed to see me as an equal in a world where that was rare. He love-bombed me with expensive gifts. A Cartier watch that cost more than most people's annual salary, designer clothes from boutiques I'd never even heard of, delivered to my apartment by personal shoppers, rare wines from his private collection, bottles that collectors would kill for. But more than the material things, he made me feel seen, understood. Like finally, here was a man who appreciated a strong, successful woman. Wait a minute. Don't miss this detail. "We could be unstoppable together," he whispered one night as we walked along Lake Michigan, the city lights reflecting off the water. "We could be a power couple. Your real estate empire, my tech company. Imagine what we could build together." He painted pictures of a future where we dominate Chicago's business scene together, where my development projects would house his expanding company, where we'd be the couple everyone else envied and aspired to be. "You complete me in a way I never expected," he said, pulling me close. "I've been waiting my whole life for someone like you, someone who gets it, someone who understands what it takes to build something meaningful." I was falling for it, hard. But what I didn't know was that Derek's charm offensive was just the beginning. The first 3 months were like a fairy tale. Derek was attentive, romantic, and seemingly supportive of my career. He'd send flowers to my office with notes about how proud he was of my latest deal. He'd brag about my accomplishments to his friends and colleagues, introducing me as the brilliant woman who's revolutionizing Chicago's commercial real estate scene. He'd even offer business advice that seemed genuinely helpful. When I was negotiating a particularly complex deal in River North, he connected me with his lawyer, who helped me navigate some tricky zoning issues. "That's what partners do," he said when I thanked them. "We support each other." But slowly, so gradually that I almost didn't notice, things began to shift. What you're seeing now is nothing. It started with small comments, observations that seemed like compliments, but left me feeling slightly off balance, like I'd missed something important in translation. We were at a business dinner with some of his associates at Gibson's Steakhouse, the kind of old-school Chicago establishment where deals were made over expensive cuts of meat and aged whiskey. The conversation had turned to the city's development boom, and one of Derek's colleagues asked about my background. "Naomi's incredible." Derek jumped in before I could answer, his hand finding my thigh under the table. "She's so articulate and well-educated. You'd never know she grew up in the projects." I felt my stomach drop like I'd just plummeted down the first hill of a roller coaster. The other men at the table, all white, all wealthy, all comfortable, nodded approvingly like Derek had just vouched for a rescued puppy's house training. That fear we all could experience, feeling undervalued, reduced to a stereotype, having our accomplishments attributed to luck rather than skill. "That's not really how I describe my background," I said quietly, trying to keep my voice steady. "Oh, come on, don't be modest," Derek laughed, his grip on my thigh tightening just slightly. "You should be proud. You've overcome so much. It's inspiring, really." Overcome. There was that word again. Like my childhood was a disease I'd recovered from, rather than the foundation that had made me strong. The other men at the table were looking at me with that particular expression I knew well. The look that said they saw me as an exception to some rule they'd made up in their heads about people like me. "It's amazing what people can accomplish when they put their minds to it," one of them said, raising his glass. "Really gives you hope for, well, you know." I knew exactly what he meant, and the fact that Derek didn't challenge it, didn't correct the implication, sent a chill down my spine. What Naomi felt at that moment, worse, was yet to come. Later that week, Derek started commenting on my business decisions with increasing frequency. It started small, suggestions that seemed reasonable on the surface. "You know, babe, you might want to consider hiring a consultant for your next deal, someone with more experience in the luxury market." We were in his penthouse apartment, a sprawling space with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the lake. I was reviewing contracts for a mixed-use development in Lincoln Park while he worked on his laptop nearby. "I've been doing this for 8 years, Derek. I think I know—" Hey, he interrupted, looking up from his computer with that patronizing smile I was starting to recognize. "I'm not questioning your success. You've obviously done incredibly well for yourself. I'm just saying, there's always room for growth, right? I could introduce you to some people." The way he said "for yourself" grated against something deep inside me, like my success was somehow separate from the broader business community he belonged to. What kind of people? People who understand the nuances of high-end commercial real estate, the kind of subtle cultural dynamics that can make or break deals in certain circles. You won't believe this, but cultural dynamics. Another red flag, waving so obviously I couldn't ignore it anymore. Cultural dynamics? Derek closed his laptop and walked over to where I was sitting, perching on the arm of my chair like he was about to explain something complex to a child. "Look, you're brilliant at identifying emerging markets and working-class neighborhoods with potential. That's your wheelhouse, and you're the best at it. But when you're dealing with old Chicago money, with families who've been here for generations, there are unwritten rules, ways of doing business that aren't immediately obvious to outsiders." Outsiders? Like I was some kind of tourist in my own city. "I've closed deals with plenty of established Chicago families," I said, my voice tighter than I intended. "Of course you have, but I'm talking about the really big players, the ones who can make or break a development with a single phone call." He ran his hand through my hair, a gesture that felt more possessive than affectionate.
I've been in this world my whole life. I know how they think, what they look for, how they evaluate potential partners. The implication was clear. I was an outsider looking in, and he was my ticket to acceptance. By month 3, Derek's comments were becoming more frequent and more pointed. The mask was slipping, revealing something underneath that made my skin crawl. We were at his penthouse again, and I was on a conference call with investors about a new property in Manhattan. It was a complex deal involving multiple stakeholders and creative financing, the kind of negotiation I'd done dozens of times before. "Gentlemen, I understand your concerns about the neighborhood demographics," I was saying, "but the gentrification patterns suggest significant appreciation potential over the next 5 to 7 years. If you look at comparable markets in Brooklyn and Portland." Derek walked over from the kitchen, where he'd been making himself a drink, and muted my phone mid-sentence. "What the hell are you doing?" I hissed, covering the phone with my hand. You were getting aggressive. I could hear them pulling back through the phone. I was being assertive. There's a difference. That strong woman was once so helpless too. I could hear the vulnerability in her voice, the doubt that Derek was carefully cultivating. "Naomi, honey, I know you think there's a difference, but from their perspective..." He settled onto the couch across from me, swirling his whiskey. "Look, these are old school Wall Street guys. They're not used to women being so forceful, especially women who..." He caught himself before finishing the sentence, but I know exactly what he'd been about to say. "Especially women who what, Derek?" "Nothing. I just think you might get better results if you approach them differently." "How, exactly?" "More diplomatically. Let them think they're leading the conversation. Work smarter, not harder." I stared at him, finally seeing the condescension that had been lurking beneath his supportive facade. "Are you seriously mansplaining negotiation tactics to me right now?" Derek's expression shifted, and for just a moment, I saw something cold and calculating beneath the charm. There's that defensive attitude again. "I'm not being defensive." "Yes, you are. And you know what? This is exactly what I'm talking about. You get confrontational over the smallest things. I'm trying to help you here, and you're acting like I'm the enemy." The word confrontational hit me like a slap. It was a word I heard my entire career, usually from men who couldn't handle being challenged by a woman, especially a Black woman. "I'm not being confrontational. I'm pointing out that you just interrupted my business call to give me advice I didn't ask for." Derek stood up, his body language shifting to something more aggressive. And honestly, it's kind of an angry Black woman stereotype, and it's not a good look for someone trying to play in these circles. The room went silent, except for the muffled voices of the investors still on hold on my phone. He'd said it, the thing that had been lurking beneath all his helpful comments. At that moment, she would see what came through her door, the real Derek Matthews, the man who had been hiding behind expensive dinners and private jets. "Excuse me?" "Look, I'm trying to help you here. I've seen this before. Successful women of color who think they have to be twice as aggressive to prove themselves. But it backfires. It makes people uncomfortable." "People like you?" "People like the investors you want to work with. People like my friends and colleagues. I'm not saying it's right, Naomi, but I'm saying it's reality." I felt like I'd been slapped. Not just by his words, but by the casual way he delivered them, like he was doing me a favor by pointing out my shortcomings. "You think I'm too aggressive?" "I think you're passionate, and that passion sometimes comes across as intensity that can be off-putting in certain contexts." Certain contexts, with certain people. People who looked like him. That night, I went home to my apartment and cried. Not because he was right, but because I was starting to doubt myself. Was I too aggressive? Was I playing into stereotypes? Was Derek trying to help me navigate a world he understood better than I did? That's how insidious gaslighting is. It makes you question your own reality, your own instincts. your own worth. And that's when I realized Derek's mask was finally coming off. But the most shocking thing was yet to come.
Month 4 was when Derek's true nature really emerged, like a snake finally shedding its skin to reveal what had been underneath all along. We were at a networking event at the Union League Club, one of Chicago's most exclusive private clubs, the kind of place where membership was inherited rather than earned, where the walls were lined with portraits of dead white men, and where the very air seemed to whisper about old money and older prejudices. I was in my element, talking to a potential investor about a mixed-use development project in the West Loop. The investor, Jim Morrison, was genuinely interested in my vision for sustainable urban development, asking thoughtful questions about environmental impact and community integration. The key is balancing gentrification with community preservation, I was explaining. We're not looking to displace existing residents, but to create opportunities for economic growth that benefit everyone. Morrison nodded approvingly. That's exactly the kind of forward-thinking approach we're looking for. Too many developers come in like bulldozers, destroying communities in the name of progress. That's when Derek appeared at my elbow, his hand finding the small of my back in a gesture that seemed supportive, but felt possessive. "Sorry to interrupt this fascinating conversation," he said smoothly, "but I need to steal Naomi away for a moment." He guided me to a corner near the club's famous library, his grip on my arm just a little too tight. The smile never left his face, but his eyes were cold. "What was that about?" I asked, pulling my arm free. "You were monopolizing Jim Morrison. He's here to talk to serious players, not to be lectured about social justice." There was only one decision moment, and Naomi's reaction would change everything. "Lectured? Derek, we were having a business conversation about a $150 million development project. A conversation that was going nowhere. Morrison doesn't want to hear about preserving communities and environmental impact. He wants to hear about returns and profit margins." Actually, that's exactly what he wanted to hear about. He specifically asked about community integration. Derek's smile became even more condescending. "Naomi, honey, I've known Jim Morrison for 15 years. I know what he responds to." "And what's that?" "Professionalism, pragmatism, not idealistic speeches about social responsibility." I stared at him, feeling something fundamental shift in how I saw him. "You mean he wants to hear from someone who looks like you?" "That's not what I said." "It's what you meant." Derek looked around the room, checking to make sure no one was listening, then leaned closer. "Look, I'm trying to help you here. You're out of your league with a guy like Morrison." "Out of my league? Derek, I just closed a $75 million deal last month. I think I can handle a conversation with an investor." "With minority business loans and tax incentives, sure. But Morrison deals in old money, generational wealth, private equity. There are cultural subtleties you don't understand." "Cultural subtleties." That sparkle in Naomi's eyes, it was too late now, but Derek was about to learn exactly who he was dealing with. "Cultural subtleties." "Naomi, you're brilliant at what you do. No one's questioning that. But there's a reason why certain doors stay closed. Certain deals happen at certain clubs, certain conversations happen on certain golf courses. It's not about your qualifications. It's about fit." I stared at him, finally seeing him clearly for the first time since we'd met. "Fit? You mean being white?" "I mean being compatible with established business practices. Look, I'm trying to protect you from embarrassing yourself. These people can smell desperation from a mile away." "Desperation?" "The trying too hard thing, the overcompensating, the need to prove yourself constantly." He paused, and I could see him choosing his words carefully. "It's very, very nouveau riche."
What would you have done? Can you imagine the anger and disappointment in that moment, realizing that the man you'd been falling for saw you as some kind of charity case? Nouveau riche. Like earning my success through hard work and intelligence was somehow less legitimate than inheriting it? Nouveau riche, I repeated slowly. I don't mean it as an insult. I admire what you've accomplished, but you have to understand, these circles value discretion, understatement, a certain effortless quality that comes from growing up in this world.
And I didn't grow up in this world. No, you didn't. And there's nothing wrong with that. But trying to force your way into spaces where you don't naturally fit, it's exhausting to watch. I felt my hands shake with rage, not just at his words, but at how calm and reasonable he sounded while delivering them, like he was a doctor delivering a difficult diagnosis. My grandmother cleaned these people's offices for 30 years, I said quietly. I earned every dollar I have. And that's exactly what I'm talking about. That chip on your shoulder, that resentment. It shows, Naomi, and it makes people uncomfortable. Maybe they should be uncomfortable. Derek's mask slipped completely then. His expression went cold, calculating, predatory. You know what your problem is, Naomi. You think the world owes you something because of your past, but playing the victim isn't a business strategy. Right at this point, everything changed. The breaking point came at Derek's company holiday party in December. Technova had rented out the entire top floor of the Palmer House Hotel, the same hotel where my grandmother used to clean rooms when I was a child. The irony wasn't lost on me. Chicago's business elite were all there, and Derek had insisted I come as his date. I'd spent weeks looking forward to it, seeing it as an opportunity to network and maybe land some new investors for my upcoming projects. I was talking to a group of tech executives about emerging markets and urban development trends when Derek joined the conversation. He'd been drinking, not heavily, but enough that his usual careful control was beginning to slip. Naomi has got some interesting theories about urban development, he said with that smile that no longer fooled me. Actually, they're not theories, I corrected calmly. I've successfully implemented these strategies across multiple markets with documented results. Right. Naomi's very passionate about her work. When the phone rang, her life would change, though she didn't know it yet. One of the executives, a woman named Sarah Chin, looked genuinely interested. What kind of developments are you working on currently? Before I could answer, Derek jumped in again. Mostly inner city revitalization projects, government-backed stuff. Very admirable work, really. She's making a real difference in underserved communities. The way he said government-backed made it sound like charity work. The way he said underserved communities made it sound like I was doing missionary work instead of running a highly profitable business. Actually, I said firmly, my current project is a $200 million mixed-use complex in River North, privately funded, market-rate housing, and commercial space. Derek's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. Well, when you say privately funded, I mean privately funded by my company and our institutional partners, Carter Properties. Of course, but your company utilizes various incentive programs and development grants. The same incentives and programs that every developer uses, including your office building's developer. You haven't seen the biggest surprise yet. The conversation was becoming uncomfortable for everyone involved.
Sarah Chin was looking between Derek and I like she was watching a tennis match, while the other executives were suddenly very interested in their drinks. "I think what Derek is trying to say," Sarah interjected diplomatically, "is that urban development is challenging work that requires creative solutions." "Exactly," Derek said, his hand finding my waist in what looked like an affectionate gesture, but felt like a warning. "Naomi's very good at finding creative solutions to complex problems." I could feel the conversation slipping away from me, my expertise being diminished and patronized in real time. But the worst was yet to come. The coup de grace came later that night. Derek had been drinking steadily throughout the evening, and his filter was completely gone. I was standing with the group of his board members when someone mentioned the Morrison building, my building, though they didn't know it was mine.
"Great location," one of them said, a silver-haired man named Robert Sinclair who'd made his fortune in manufacturing. "Though I heard it was sold to some minority-owned firm earlier this year, probably overpaid in this market." I was about to speak when Derek appeared, swaying slightly with a fresh whiskey in his hand. "Actually, my girlfriend owns that building," he said, his voice carrying that particular tone drunk people use when they think they're being clever. Naomi was caught between two difficult choices: stay silent and continue being humiliated, or speak up and risk Derek's wrath. The group turned to look at me with surprised expressions. "Your girlfriend?" Robert Sinclair's eyebrows shot up. "Yeah, meet Naomi Carter. She's in real estate." "Carter Properties?" Another board member, a woman named Margaret Walsh, looked genuinely impressed. "You're the one who bought the Morrison building?" "I am." "Impressive," Robert said, though his tone suggested he was recalculating everything he thought he knew about me. "Though I have to ask, and forgive me if this is forward, but how does someone so young afford a property like that?" It was a question I'd been asked 100 times, always with the same underlying assumption. The assumption that someone like me couldn't possibly have earned that kind of money legitimately. "Hard work and smart investments," I replied calmly, the same answer I always gave. Derek laughed. The sound sharp and ugly in the elegant surroundings, and some creative financing, right, babe? When she read that document, everything would change. But first, Derek was going to make sure everyone understood exactly how he saw her success. I shot him a warning look, but he was too drunk to care or too angry to stop. "Come on, don't be modest. Tell them about the minority business loans, the tax credits, the community development grants." "Derek, stop." "What? It's smart business, using every advantage available to you." He took another sip of whiskey, his eyes glittering with something cruel. "You have to admire the hustle, right? Making the system work for you." "The same advantages every developer uses," I said through gritted teeth. "Right. But when you're working from behind, you have to be more resourceful, more creative with your funding sources." "Working from behind?" "You know what I mean. Starting from where you started with the background you have. It takes extra effort to get to where the rest of us began." What you're seeing now is nothing compared to what was coming next. The group was watching this exchange with growing discomfort, but Derek was too far gone to notice or care. "Where I started?" I repeated slowly, my voice deadly quiet. "The projects, the single-parent household, the whole urban background thing." He waved his hand dismissively. "It's inspiring, really. The American dream in action." I felt something snap inside me. Not just anger, but a kind of clarity that comes when you finally see someone for exactly who they are. The urban background thing?
Look, I admire it. I admire you. But let's not pretend it's the same as someone who grew up in Winnetka and went to New Trier, or whose father took them to board meetings at the Union League Club when they were 12 years old. And then Derek said the words that would seal his fate. You're right, Derek. It's not the same. Because someone from Winnetka wouldn't have had to work twice as hard for half the recognition. They wouldn't have to prove themselves over and over again to people who assume they don't belong. Derek's face flushed red. Whether from the alcohol or anger, I couldn't tell. There it is, the victim mentality. Everything's about race with you people. The words hung in the air like a toxic cloud. You people. No, Derek, everything's about race with you. That's ridiculous. I'm the least racist person I know. I'm dating you, aren't I? The room went dead silent. Even the ambient noise from the rest of the party seemed to fade away. Dating me doesn't make you not racist, Derek. It makes you a racist who fetishizes Black women.
Derek's expression turned ugly. All pretense of charm finally abandoned. You know what? I tried to help you. I tried to elevate you, introduce you to the right people, teach you how to navigate these circles, but you can't get past your own anger. My anger? Yes, your anger. You're an angry Black woman who thinks the world owes her something, and frankly, it's exhausting. The room went dead silent. And that's when Derek made his biggest mistake. An angry Black woman, I repeated, my voice carrying clearly in the sudden quiet. Yes, and until you deal with that chip on your shoulder, you're never going to reach your full potential in this business. I looked around the room, at all these successful white faces staring at us like we were dinner theater, at Robert Sinclair, who was suddenly very interested in his shoes, at Margaret Walsh, who was looking at me with something that might have been pity. Everyone had learned the truth, but the real shock was still coming. You know what, Derek? You're absolutely right. I am angry, but not for the reasons you think. The next morning, Derek called me. I was in my apartment, still in my pajamas, still processing what had happened the night before. Naomi, honey, I think we need to talk about last night. I may have had a little too much to drink, and I said some things that came out wrong. His voice was smooth, practiced, like he'd given this speech before to other women he'd humiliated. You think? Look, I'm sorry if I said some things that hurt your feelings. You know I don't see color when I look at you. You're just Naomi to me. That's part of the problem, Derek. What do you mean? I walked to my window, looking out at the Chicago skyline, the same skyline I'd conquered, building by building, deal by deal. You don't see me as a Black woman who succeeded despite systemic racism. You see me as someone who succeeded because of it. Someone who had unfair advantages you never had. But what Naomi was planning was something Derek couldn't even imagine. That's not true. It is exactly what you think. Last night proved that. When you introduced me to your board, you didn't talk about my Harvard MBA, my track record, my portfolio. You talked about government programs and creative financing like I'm some kind of welfare case who stumbled into success. I was trying to give context. You were trying to diminish me, to make sure everyone knew that my success wasn't really legitimate, that I had help you didn't. Derek's voice took on that patronizing tone I'd grown to hate. Naomi, come on. Let's meet for lunch and work this out. What we have is special. You know that. I almost laughed. What we have, Derek, is over. You're making a mistake. We're good together. We complement each other. I can open doors for you that would otherwise stay closed. No, Derek, you complement me. I was never anything more to you than a trophy, a way to prove to yourself and everyone else how progressive and open-minded you are. That's not fair, isn't it?
When's the last time you introduced me as Naomi Carter, CEO of Carter Properties, worth 9 figures in real estate? You always introduce me as your girlfriend who happens to be in real estate or works in urban development. There was silence on the other end of the line. You collect successful Black women like other men collect vintage wines, something exotic and impressive to show off at parties, but ultimately, just another possession in your collection. You're being ridiculous. Am I? Tell me, Derek, how many Black executives are on your board? How many Black partners do you have at Technova? How many Black people work in leadership positions at your company? More silence. I want you to stay away from me, Derek. Naomi, wait. I hung up. When they thought it was over, Derek wasn't done with me.
But Derek wasn't the kind of man who accepted rejection gracefully. Over the next 2 weeks, he launched a subtle campaign to undermine me in Chicago's business community. Nothing overt, nothing actionable, just quiet conversations and strategic whispers. I heard about it through Sarah Chan, the tech executive I'd met at Derek's party. She called me a week after our conversation. "I wanted to give you a heads up," she said. "Derek's been making some comments about you at business events. Nothing directly slanderous, but concerning." "What kind of comments?" "He's been questioning your business practices, suggesting that your success might not be entirely legitimate. He's being careful about how he phrases it, but the implication is clear." I felt a cold rage settle in my stomach. "Thank you for telling me. For what it's worth, I think he's full of shit. Your reputation speaks for itself. But I thought you should know what he's doing." That afternoon, I got a call from my property manager. "Miss Carter, we have a situation at the Morrison building. The tenant in the penthouse suite is refusing to pay rent. Claims there are issues with the lease terms that need to be renegotiated." "Which tenant?" "Technova Industries." My blood ran cold. "Derek Matthews?" "Yes, ma'am. His lawyers sent a letter claiming the building has maintenance issues that violate their lease agreement. They're requesting a meeting with building ownership to discuss lease modifications and potential rent reductions." I smiled for the first time in weeks. It was a cold, calculated smile that would have made Derek nervous if he could have seen it. "Set up the meeting. Conference room B, tomorrow at 2 p.m. "Should I tell him you'll be attending?" "Oh, I'll be there. But don't tell him I'm the owner he'll be meeting with. Let him think he's meeting with some corporate representative." "Yes, ma'am. Anything else?" "Yes. Pull all documentation related to Technova's lease. Every payment record, every maintenance request, every communication. I want it all ready for tomorrow." What they saw when the door opened would change everything. The next day, I walked into my own building's conference room wearing my most professional suit, a custom-tailored navy blue piece that had cost more than most people's monthly salary, and my grandmother's pearl necklace. The same pearl she'd worn to church every Sunday, the only jewelry she'd owned that wasn't from a department store. Derek was already there with his lawyers and his CFO, looking confident and relaxed. He dressed for the occasion too, expensive suit, silk tie, gold watch, the uniform of a man who never doubted that every room he entered belonged to him. He was reviewing documents spread across the conference table, pointing to specific clauses and speaking in low, authoritative tones to his legal team. This was Derek in his element, commanding, in control, certain of his superiority. "Gentlemen," I said as I entered, my voice carrying clearly across the room, "sorry to keep you waiting." Derek's head snapped up, and I watched his face cycle through emotions in real time. Surprise, confusion,
then something that looked like fear. "Naomi, what are you doing here?" I set my briefcase on the table and took the seat at the head of the conference table, the power position, the one that made it clear who was running this meeting. "I'm here for the meeting you requested with building ownership to discuss your lease concerns." I don't understand. Derek's lawyers were looking between us with growing confusion. His CFO, a nervous-looking man named Peterson, was flipping through his notes like he'd missed something important. I opened my briefcase with deliberate precision and pulled out a leather portfolio. The voice on the phone was familiar, but Derek was about to learn exactly who had been on the other end of the line. "Allow me to introduce myself properly. Naomi Carter, CEO of Carter Properties and sole owner of the Morrison Building." The room was dead silent, except for the distant sounds of traffic from the street below. Derek's lawyer leaned over and whispered something urgent in his ear, but Derek wasn't listening. He was staring at me like I was a ghost. This is impossible," Derek stammered. "The building is owned by some holding company, NC Holdings or something."
NC Holdings, LLC, which stands for Naomi Carter Holdings, which is wholly owned by Carter Properties, which is wholly owned by me. I opened the portfolio and slid a document across the table. Property deed, filed with the city of Chicago 3 years ago. Derek's face was cycling through emotions: shock, anger, humiliation, and something that looked like panic. He only had a few minutes to process this before I continued. "Now, I understand you have some concerns about your lease?" Derek's CFO cleared his throat, trying to regain some semblance of professionalism. "Miss Carter, we've been having some issues with the building's HVAC system, and we feel our rent is disproportionate to the value we're receiving." "I'm sorry," I interrupted, my voice polite but firm. "But I'm afraid Technova Industries no longer fits the cultural profile we're looking for in this building." Derek's eyes narrowed. "Cultural profile?" "Yes. We prefer tenants who understand the nuances of professional relationships, who can appreciate compatibility." Derek realized I was throwing his own words back at him, and his face went white. That strong woman was finally seeing the respect she deserved. "Naomi, you can't be serious." "Oh, I'm very serious. In fact, I'm invoking the 60-day termination clause in your lease, effective immediately." "What? You can't do that." I slid another folder across the table. "Section 12.3 of your lease agreement allows for immediate termination if the tenant engages in behavior that reflects poorly on the building's reputation or creates a hostile environment for other tenants." Derek's lawyer was frantically flipping through the pages. We need time to review." "Inside that folder, you'll find documentation of your public statements at the Palmer House Hotel on December 15th, corroborated by multiple witnesses, video footage from the hotel's security cameras, and testimonials from several Chicago business leaders who were present during your outburst." Derek's face was now completely drained of color. "This is retaliation. This is personal." "No, Mr. Matthews, this is business. The same kind of cold, calculating business decision you've been making your whole career." I stood up, closing my briefcase with a sharp click. "You have 60 days to vacate the premises. All outstanding rent is due immediately, along with the early termination fee specified in Section 15.7 of your lease." "Naomi, please." "Miss Carter," I corrected coldly. Derek looked up at me, his face a mixture of rage, humiliation, and desperation. "Look,
I know things got heated between us personally, but this affects my entire company, my employees. Should have thought about that before you decided to question my business practices and spread rumors about my success in Chicago's business community. His lawyer looked confused. I'm sorry, what rumors? I smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Oh, Mr. Matthews didn't tell you about his little whisper campaign, about how he's been suggesting to potential investors that my success might not be entirely legitimate. Derek's CFO looked horrified. Derek, what is she talking about? I have documentation of that as well. Phone calls, witness statements, even some interesting audio recordings from various business events around town. This was a bluff. I didn't have recordings, but Derek didn't know that, and his guilty expression confirmed everything I needed to know. You have 60 days, Mr. Matthews. And Derek, he looked up at me, his arrogance finally completely stripped away. Next time you meet a successful Black woman, maybe don't assume she got there through handouts and luck. Some of us actually earned everything we have. I walked toward the door, then turned back for one final moment. Oh, and one more thing.
That angry Black woman you were so concerned about, she just evicted your ass. I left Derek and his team sitting in stunned silence in the conference room of my building. As I walked back to my office, I could hear raised voices through the closed door, Derek's team realizing the full scope of what had just happened. 6 months later, the fallout from that meeting was still reverberating through Chicago's business community. Technova had to relocate to a much smaller, much cheaper building on the outskirts of the Loop. The rushed move cost them significantly, broken leases on equipment, lost productivity during the transition, key employees who quit rather than deal with the longer commute. Derek tried to sue me, claiming wrongful eviction and business interference. His lawyers quickly realized he had no case. Every action I'd taken was legally justified and meticulously documented. The lawsuit was quietly dropped after 3 months, but not before it became public knowledge, further damaging Derek's reputation. More significantly, I heard through the grapevine that Derek's board of directors started asking uncomfortable questions about his judgment after the lease termination became public knowledge. When the full story of his behavior came to light, including witness statements from the Palmer House incident, several major investors quietly withdrew their support. Technova's stock price dropped 15% over the following quarter. 2 board members resigned. Derek was forced to step back from day-to-day operations and eventually resigned as CEO 8 months later. As for me, Carter Properties is now worth over $500 million. I've been featured on the cover of Forbes, Fortune, and Black Enterprise. I was named one of Chicago's most influential business leaders by Crain's Chicago Business. I've spoken at Harvard Business School, my alma mater, about entrepreneurship and overcoming systemic barriers in commercial real estate. But more than the accolades and recognition, I've never let another person make me question my worth again. Derek taught me something valuable, though he probably doesn't realize it. He taught me that racism doesn't always come with white hoods and burning crosses. Sometimes it comes with charming smiles and expensive dinners. Sometimes it comes from people who think they're helping you by elevating you to their level. Sometimes it comes wrapped in love and concern, delivered by people who genuinely believe they're doing you a favor by pointing out your flaws and limitations. The most insidious racism is the kind that makes you doubt yourself. The kind that makes you question whether you really deserve your success, whether you really belong in those rooms where decisions are made, whether you really have what it takes to compete at the highest levels. But here's the thing about people like Derek.
They never realized that some of us were never below their level to begin with. We were just standing on different ground. Derek grew up with a trust fund, connections, and opportunities handed to him on a silver platter. He went to boarding school, then Yale, then stepped into a family business where success was practically guaranteed. I grew up in housing projects with a grandmother who worked 3 jobs. I earned scholarships, worked multiple jobs through college, and built my success from nothing but intelligence, determination, and an absolute refusal to accept anyone else's limitations on my potential. And sometimes, that different ground, that foundation built on struggle and determination, turns out to be bedrock solid, while their inherited privilege turns out to be quicksand. And sometimes, that ground happens to be the foundation of the building they're renting. That moment we all could experience when we feel we have to prove ourselves, when we start to doubt our own worth because someone else questions it. If you're a woman, especially a woman of color, who has ever been made to feel like your success isn't legitimate, like you don't belong in certain spaces, like you should be grateful for crumbs from someone else's table, remember this story. You don't need anyone's validation. You don't need anyone to elevate you. You're already exactly where you're supposed to be. Your education is legitimate. Your success is earned. Your presence in those boardrooms and conference rooms and exclusive events isn't a favor someone granted you. It's a right you've claimed through your own merit. And if someone tries to tell you otherwise, well, maybe it's time to show them who really owns the building. The biggest power move isn't getting angry. It's staying calm while you systematically dismantle someone's entire world with facts they never saw coming. The most satisfying revenge isn't emotional. It's professional. It's watching someone who tried to diminish you face the consequences of underestimating exactly who they were dealing with. Remember, your success is not a fluke. Your achievements are not accidents. You don't owe anyone an explanation for being exactly as powerful as you are. And sometimes, the best way to respond to someone who tries to put you in your place is to show them that your place is exactly where you choose it to be, including at the head of the conference table in the building you own, delivering news that changes their life forever. Derek learned that lesson the hard way, and honestly, I hope he never forgets it.
And so, this story comes to an end, but the pain it carries is real and lasting. Behind his mask, there may be charm, but also lies, manipulation, and silence. If you've experienced something similar, please don't hesitate to share it in the comments below or send it to us directly. Your story matters, your truth matters, and your voice might be the one that saves someone else from falling into the same trap. Together, we break the silence. Together, we unmask the lies. And together, we rise stronger. Thank you for listening. Share this story. Save a sister. End the fetishization.